I worked at Area 51 for 6 years. If you're hoping for some blockbuster conspiracy, little green men, UFOs zipping through the desert sky, I'll tell you up front, it's worse than that. A lot worse. Those movies and stories, the ones people whisper about, are almost comforting compared to what's actually hidden out there. When I first started, I didn't ask questions. That's rule number 1 when you get inside the gates. Don't ask, just do the job. My job was quiet. Maintenance work in lower security zones, replacing circuit boards, running diagnostics on standard tech. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and I didn't have to know more than I needed to. Honestly, I liked it that way. Then, about 2 years in, I was transferred to a different building. They didn't explain much, just handed me a new badge and escorted me to a cold, gray wing buried under 2 stories of reinforced steel. I remember feeling uneasy the second I stepped inside. The air had a strange weight to it, like walking into a room that hasn't been opened in years. No hum of ventilation, no faint buzzing of fluorescent lights, just thick, heavy silence. It wasn't empty, though. They had people there, scientists mostly, all staring at screens or hovering over equipment. I swear they were listening for something. None of them looked up as I was brought in. Not one. Like I didn't even exist. They sat me down in a small room that was so sterile it felt like it would erase me if I sat there too long. A man came in wearing a gray suit, not military, not lab gear, just gray. He looked average in every way. Average build, average haircut, average face, like he'd been made to blend into nothingness. "You'll be helping with an experiment," he said. No name, no introduction. "You're going to go through the gate." He said it casually, like it was something normal. I laughed, because what else could I do? "The gate? What's that?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me with this hollow stare, like he wasn't even really seeing me anymore. "You'll understand soon." I didn't. Not then. They prepped me with vague instructions. Keep calm, move slowly, don't touch anything you don't recognize, and gave me a suit to wear. The thing wasn't like any hazmat suit I'd seen before. It was too thin, too cold when I pulled it on, almost like it wasn't made for this world. Then they took me down a long corridor where the walls started changing. At first, they were the same sterile white, but as we walked deeper, I noticed the paint peeling. It wasn't from age, it was something else. It looked burned, blistered and cracked as if the walls had been close to intense heat. No one else seemed to care. At the end of the hallway was a door. Just an ordinary door. A metal handle, no markings, no locks. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought it was just a janitor's closet. But when they opened it, my body instinctively froze. I could feel it before I saw it. Something cold and wrong pouring out from the other side, like the air itself was rejecting whatever was in that room. Inside was the gate. It wasn't a machine, not exactly. Imagine a massive frame of black metal, perfectly rectangular with no bolts or seams. It was too smooth, too intentional, like someone or something had made it without tools. The center was empty, but if you stared long enough, you'd see ripples in the space inside the frame, like looking through water. And it hummed. Not loud, but deep. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, in my teeth, as if the sound had a weight of its own. I think that's when I realized this wasn't just an experiment. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't ours. One of the scientists handed me a headset. "Communication only goes one way," he said. "We can hear you, but you won't hear us." "Wait," I said, my voice cracking despite myself. "What's on the other side?" No one answered. The man in the gray suit just nodded toward the gate. I swear I saw something move in the ripples when I looked back, but before I could say anything, they were pushing me forward. "Don't stop walking," someone said behind me. "Once you're through, don't look back." I don't know if you've ever stood on the edge of something you couldn't understand, but your body knows when you're not supposed to be there. My hands were sweating inside the gloves. My chest felt tight, like the air was squeezing me. And that hum was in my bones. I didn't want to go through. I didn't want to know what was waiting, but they were watching me. Waiting. I had no choice. So I stepped through the gate. When I stepped through the gate, there was no flash of light, no dramatic sound, just the world tilting sideways for an instant. Like I was falling in slow motion, but my feet never left the ground. I blinked and suddenly everything was different. The first thing I noticed was the sky, if you could call it that. It was black, but not empty. I could see faint, shifting patterns like something massive and alive was just beyond a curtain. Stars were there, but wrong. Too close, too sharp, like holes poked through fabric. I didn't look up for long. The air felt thin, like breathing in after running for too long. I pulled in short, shallow breaths through my suit's mask, but it didn't help. I couldn't shake the feeling that this place was rejecting me, like I was some foreign object that didn't belong here. I lowered my gaze, and that's when I saw the ground. Flat and gray, like poured concrete, except it wasn't solid. When I moved my foot, the ground rippled ever so slightly, but it didn't sink under my weight. I bent down to touch it, against every instinct screaming at me not to, and it was ice cold. It felt smooth, but the longer I held my hand there, the colder it got, like it was pulling the heat out of me. I yanked my hand back and stared at the faint imprint my fingers left behind. It smoothed itself out, like the surface of water, then was still again. I stood up and scanned the horizon. There wasn't much to see. The landscape stretched endlessly, empty and gray, except for something faint far ahead, a jagged outline against the sky, almost like buildings but too sharp, too uneven. The headset crackled. "Keep moving," a voice said, just loud enough to hear. "Do not stop." I wanted to ask where I was going. I wanted to ask what this place was. But they weren't listening. They couldn't hear me. I was alone. I started walking. It was hard to tell how far I was going because there were no landmarks, no real sense of distance. The ground didn't crunch under my feet, didn't make any sound at all. The silence followed me like a shadow. I kept my eyes forward, staring at the jagged shapes ahead. They were growing clearer now, massive structures far larger than I'd realized at first. The closer I got, the more details I could make out. The structures weren't buildings, not really. They had angles that didn't make sense, walls that folded into themselves, edges that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. The surface of the structures was dark, like burned stone, but every now and then I'd see something shift just beneath it, like light passing through liquid. As I got closer, I could hear something faint, like whispers just below the edge of hearing. I turned my head, trying to figure out where it was coming from, but it was everywhere. Constant. It wasn't a voice, not really. It was more like a feeling, pressing against the edges of my mind but not breaking through. I didn't realize I'd stopped walking until the voice in my headset crackled again, sharper this time. "Keep moving." I swallowed hard and forced my legs to start again. The whispers got louder the closer I got to the structures. My skin felt tight under the suit, like it was too small for my body, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned quickly, looking behind me, but there was nothing there, just the empty gray stretch of nothing. I kept walking, trying to focus on the jagged shapes ahead, but then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Movement. I froze. It wasn't big, whatever it was, but it was there, rippling the ground in slow, unnatural patterns. The headset buzzed. "Don't look at it. Keep your eyes forward." I didn't move. I couldn't. The ripples were moving closer now, spreading out like something swimming just beneath the surface. Then it stopped. For a long second, there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the heavy weight of silence pressing down on me. Then something broke the surface. A shape, black and oily, slid upward like it was pulling itself out of thick liquid. It had no defined form, no face, no features, just a writhing mass of tendrils that seemed to shimmer in and out of focus. It didn't move toward me. It just stood there, as if waiting for something. Watching me. The voice in my headset spoke again, lower this time. "It knows you're here. Don't run. Just keep moving." I didn't want to take my eyes off it, but I had to. My body was stiff as I turned back toward the jagged structures. The whispers were louder now, scratching at the inside of my skull, but I forced myself to take one step, then another. I didn't look back. The rippling followed me, though. I could hear it, the soft, sloshing sound of something moving through the not-quite-solid ground. It wasn't fast, it wasn't close, but it was following me. By the time I reached the structures, the whispers were a roar in my head. I had to steady myself with one hand against the dark surface of the closest wall, and the moment I touched it, my vision blurred. For a split second, I saw something. People, or what was left of them. Faces stretched in silent screams, their bodies half absorbed into the black stone. Their eyes turned toward me, and I swear I felt them pulling. I yanked my hand back, stumbling, my breath ragged. "Where am I?" I shouted, but the headset was silent. The whispers were inside me now, crawling through my thoughts like worms. I didn't know where I was supposed to go. I didn't even know if I could go back. I looked around, and in the distance, beyond the sharp walls, I saw a light, faint and flickering. It was the only thing here that didn't feel wrong, so I started toward it. The structures loomed taller as I moved through them, their edges blending into the sky, sharp and shifting like broken glass. The ground beneath me pulsed faintly now, almost as if it was breathing, matching my uneven steps. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the flickering light in the distance. It felt impossibly far, a pinprick of warmth in a world that was utterly dead. But I wasn't alone anymore. I felt it before I saw anything, the weight of something unseen, watching from the edges of my vision. The rippling was back, but it wasn't behind me anymore. It was everywhere, shivers in the ground, soft movements I could barely catch. I quickened my pace, my breath echoing loud, and panicked inside the suit. Something moved on my left. A shadow, tall and thin, sliding between the walls. I didn't look directly at it, but I saw enough. Its body didn't move naturally. It shifted in bursts, like an image glitching on a broken screen. I heard a faint click, 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 and then it was gone. I whispered, "Are you seeing this? Are you hearing me?" The headset didn't answer. It had gone completely silent. The flickering light was closer now. I could make out its glow spilling out from between two massive structures. I turned toward it, but when I did, I froze. Ahead of me, standing still as a statue in the path, was another figure. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its proportions were stretched, its arms too long, its neck bending at an unnatural angle. Its skin, or whatever was left of it, looked like a dull reflection, rippling slightly as though it was made from the same material as the gate. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless surface where one should have been. It didn't move, neither did I. The ground rippled between us. Slowly, it lifted one hand, long fingers pointing directly at me. "Don't look at it." The voice in my headset came back, harsh and loud, startling me. "Keep moving. Do not stop." I didn't hesitate. I stepped to the side and walked around the figure, never letting my eyes stay on it for long. Even then, I could feel it watching me, the empty space where its face should have been turned toward me the entire time. I kept walking, forcing myself not to look back. The path opened into a clearing, a flat, empty space between the structures. In the center of it, the light flickered weakly, glowing from a metal pole stabbed into the ground. Attached to it was a small rusted box, wires trailing out of it like veins. It looked out of place here, too human in this alien landscape. I stumbled closer, half expecting someone to be there, someone who could explain what was happening, but there was no one, only the faint hum of the box. As I reached for it, a voice crackled through the headset. "You're close. It's a beacon. Turn it off." I stopped. "What happens if I turn it off?" The voice didn't answer. I looked back toward the structures. The shadows were moving again, sliding between walls, rippling the ground, drawing closer. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, like something was waking up. I grabbed the box and flipped it open. Inside was a single switch. I hesitated. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard a voice, not the one in the headset. This voice was wrong, warped and distant like it had been dragged through 1,000 miles of static. It said my name. Don't touch it. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure with no face was standing at the edge of the clearing, closer than before. And now there were more of them, standing in the shadows, watching, waiting. The voice in my headset barked again. Turn it off. My hand shook as I reached for the switch. The faceless figures stepped forward in unison, their movements jerky and unnatural. The whispers in my head rose to a scream. Words I couldn't understand, layered over each other like 1,000 voices speaking at once. I flipped the switch. The light went out. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the ground beneath me shook. The ripples turned violent, spreading outward like waves crashing against a shore. I stumbled, falling to my knees as the air around me grew heavy and hot. The sky, if it was a sky, began to shift. The stars overhead blinked out, one by one, swallowed by something massive and unseen. The ground split open. A sound erupted from deep below me, low and inhuman, like metal groaning under unimaginable weight. The faceless figures didn't move. They just stood there, motionless, as the ground between us cracked and split, revealing darkness deeper than anything I'd ever seen. The voice in the headset was frantic now. Get back to the gate, move. I got to my feet and ran. I didn't care what direction I was going. I just ran. The structures seemed to close in around me, their walls shifting and twisting as though alive. The whispers were gone now, replaced by a deep, rhythmic thrum that seemed to pulse through the entire landscape. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The gate was ahead of me, its black frame shimmering in the distance. It looked smaller now, like it was fading, but I pushed myself forward, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. Behind me, I heard something following, something massive. The ground shook with each step it took, and I could hear the sound of stone breaking, splintering. I didn't dare turn to see what it was. I just kept my eyes on the gate. I could feel it now, whatever was chasing me. The air grew colder with every step, like it was pulling the life out of me. My vision started to blur at the edges, my limbs growing heavy. I stumbled, falling hard onto the ground, my hands sinking into the rippling surface. I looked up, and the gate was just ahead. It flickered, the edges shifting like a dying signal. The voice in the headset was barely audible now. You're almost there. Don't stop. I crawled the last few feet, dragging myself toward the black frame. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. I could hear the thing behind me now, closer. So close. I reached out with one hand, my fingertips brushing the edge of the gate, and then I fell through. When I hit the ground, it felt real, solid, cold, but human. I sucked in a breath, choking on it like I hadn't inhaled in hours. My vision swam, my body trembling uncontrollably as I pushed myself up to my knees. The sound, the thundering footsteps, the crushing weight of something chasing me, was gone. The whispers had stopped. The silence was deafening, but familiar. I was back. The gate stood behind me, humming faintly, its surface duller now, the black shifting like oil on water. It seemed smaller, shrinking in on itself, as though whatever had kept it alive was fading. I stared at it, my chest rising and falling, trying to process everything I had just seen. Felt. A voice crackled through the headset again. Report. I yanked it off, throwing it to the side. My ears rang. I wanted to scream at someone, demand to know what I'd been sent into, what I'd brought back, because I could still feel it. That cold, pressing weight, like something was still watching me, just beyond the edges of my vision. I wiped the sweat from my face. my skin clammy and pale in the low light of the hangar. The room around me was empty. The gate was the only thing here, sitting in the middle of the vast, sterile space. I couldn't see the observation windows above where the others should have been watching. I called out, "Hey!" My voice echoed off the walls, hollow and thin. Nothing. I stumbled to my feet, legs shaking, and turned in a slow circle. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, flickering in and out, throwing shadows that didn't match their sources. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I wasn't alone. The feeling was back, that sensation of being watched, like someone standing too close behind you, just outside your peripheral vision. I turned quickly, scanning the hangar, but there was no one there, just rows of empty equipment, dull metal surfaces, and the gate, shimmering weakly now. Then I heard it, soft, faint, a sound like fabric sliding over stone. I turned toward the far side of the hangar. At first, there was nothing, just darkness pooling in the corners, stretching farther than it should have. But then I saw movement. A figure, tall and thin, standing perfectly still in the shadows. Its limbs were too long, its neck slightly bent, its body featureless and smooth. I blinked. It was gone. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. The lights above me flickered again, buzzing louder this time. In the brief flashes of dark, the shadows seemed to grow, reaching closer, and I swear I saw something move within them. Not fast, not directly, just a soft ripple like the edge of something massive sliding into view. A voice, small and mechanical, echoed faintly from the discarded headset on the ground. "Status report. Are you there? Respond." I ignored it. I had to get out. I turned toward the hangar doors, massive steel slabs that separated this room from the rest of the facility. They were closed, but I knew the release panel was nearby. I walked toward it, trying to stay calm, my footsteps sharp against the concrete floor. The lights flickered again. When they came back, the figure was there. Closer now. It stood halfway across the hangar, its featureless head tilted slightly toward me. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just was. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. The silence in the room felt heavy, like the air had thickened around me. Then, slowly, the figure tilted its head farther. A faint sound followed, like bones shifting in sockets. The lights went out. Total darkness. I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall, my hands scrabbling to find the release panel. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything except the pounding of my own heartbeat. The darkness wasn't empty. I could feel it pressing against me, thick and cold. And then, click. The lights buzzed back on, dim and unsteady. The figure was gone. But I wasn't alone. I knew it now. The gate, whatever lay beyond it, had left something behind. I looked back at it, its surface dull, but still alive. I could see faint shapes moving within it, like shadows swimming under dark water. They weren't gone. They were here. The room around me felt wrong, like the edges of reality were slipping. The walls seemed farther away now, the ceiling too high. I looked toward the steel doors and the panel blinked red. Locked. A noise cut through the silence. Soft at first. Tap, 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 like fingertips drumming on glass. It came from above me. I looked up. Through the observation windows, I saw shapes moving. Tall, thin figures pressed against the glass, their heads tilted downward, watching me. Their limbs didn't move naturally. They bent wrong, shifting in sharp, jerking motions as they pressed closer to the windows. The glass began to crack. I bolted for the far side of the hangar, searching for another way out. Behind me, I heard the sound of glass shattering, followed by the soft slap of something wet and heavy hitting the ground. I didn't look back. I found another door, this one smaller, an emergency exit. The panel flashed red, but I slammed my fist against it over and over until the light flickered green. The door hissed and slid open, and I stumbled through into a narrow hallway. The air here was colder, heavier. The walls hummed faintly, like something alive was running just beneath the surface. I pressed forward, my hands brushing against the walls to steady myself. I heard footsteps behind me, soft and deliberate. I ran. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, twisting and shifting as I moved. I couldn't tell if it was real or if my mind was unraveling, but I kept going. The footsteps followed, steady, unhurried, always just far enough behind to remind me I wasn't alone. At the end of the hall, I saw another door, this one marked with an exit sign glowing weakly in the dark. I sprinted for it, throwing my shoulder against it. The door gave way. I fell forward into the night air, cold and sharp. I was outside the facility now, on the edge of the Nevada desert. The sky above was normal again, empty and black, dotted with familiar stars. I gasped, falling to my knees, my body shaking. For the first time in what felt like hours, I couldn't feel the weight of that thing pressing down on me. The footsteps had stopped. But as I looked back at the facility, the gate was still there. And in its shimmering surface, I saw something move. Something watching me. I didn't stop running. The desert stretched endlessly around me, silent and vast, but I didn't care. I wanted as much distance between me and that place as I could get. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I didn't know where I was going. There were no landmarks out here, no lights, just black sky and endless sand. The facility behind me shrank into a dark smudge, the gate still faintly glowing, a silent wound in the world. I thought I was safe, but I wasn't. The first sign was the hum. Faint at first, almost like a vibration in my chest, too soft to pinpoint. I slowed, looking over my shoulder. The horizon was empty. The hum grew louder. It felt like it was inside me, rattling my ribs, making my skin crawl. Then I noticed the stars. The sky was wrong. The stars were shifting, moving. I stopped, staring upward. They weren't twinkling anymore. They were drifting, like lights sinking beneath water. The hum grew into a low, pulsing throb that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. It felt like something enormous had woken up beneath the earth. I turned to run again. That's when I saw it. A shape stood ahead of me in the sand. A figure, tall and thin, perfectly still. It had followed me. I don't know how. It didn't matter. It was here. The hum grew deafening, vibrating through the ground, making it feel like the earth itself was trembling beneath my feet. The figure took a step toward me. I stumbled back. "Stay away!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. It didn't stop. Its limbs moved in jerky, unnatural bursts, its head tilting as though trying to understand me. The hum deepened, pulling at the air, making it hard to breathe. I could feel it in my chest, in my teeth. The figure kept coming. I turned and ran, but the ground wasn't solid anymore. It rippled beneath my feet, dragging at my boots. I stumbled and fell, sand filling my mouth and nose. I pushed myself up, coughing, and looked back. The figure was closer now, no more than 10 feet away. In the dim light, I saw its skin, or whatever passed for skin, shimmer faintly, as though it wasn't fully here, like it was sliding between this world and another. Its face, or the absence of one, was smooth, black, empty. It lifted one long, bony arm and pointed at me. The hum stopped. For a single moment, the world was silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, rapid and frantic in my ears. I could feel sweat freezing on my skin, my muscles locked in place. Then I heard the voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It sounded like me. "You shouldn't have turned it off." The figure didn't speak. The voice came from everywhere. From the sky, from the ground, from inside my own head. It repeated, softer now, more distorted. "You shouldn't have turned it off." I shook my head. No. No. The figure stepped closer. Its body rippled like heat off pavement. I tried to move, to crawl away, but my body wouldn't respond. I felt paralyzed, held in place by something I couldn't see. "You let it in," the voice said. "It's awake now." I didn't understand. None of this made sense. My head throbbed, my vision blurring at the edges. I tried to close my eyes, but it didn't help. I could still see the figure, burned into my mind like an afterimage. It was closer now, looming over me, blocking out the shifting stars. Then it bent down. I felt its hand, cold and dry, grip my arm. The touch spread through me like frost, numbing everything it touched. My head rolled back as the hum returned, louder than before, shaking my very bones. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. I felt something shift deep inside me, a pressure building behind my eyes, in my chest, in my mind. It let go. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hangar. The gate stood in front of me, shimmering faintly, almost dead. I was lying on the cold concrete floor, my breath shallow, my hands shaking. It was as though the desert had never happened. My mind felt frayed, like someone had taken a hot needle and traced patterns through my thoughts. I pushed myself up, my body weak and aching. The hangar was empty. No figures, no shadows, just silence. The gate was dark now, its frame dull and lifeless. It looked closed. I turned in a slow circle, my heart pounding. I wasn't sure how I had come back, or if I had come back. My skin felt wrong, like it didn't quite fit anymore, stretched too tight over something else. The observation windows above me were cracked, the glass webbed with fractures. Beyond them, I saw shapes moving. Those same tall, thin figures, their limbs twitching as they pressed closer to the broken glass. Watching. I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around. The hum began again, faint at first, building into that familiar, overwhelming throb. I felt it spread through the floor, through my bones, rattling me like an empty shell. I knew, in that moment, that I hadn't left the other side. I was still there, and they had followed me back.